Hello and welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast. I'm James Martin, joined today by Matt Addison. Before we get into today's episode, the usual message from NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee, and the link is in the podcast episode description box. Right, Matt, hello again. It's another week, another Liverpool.com podcast, and the dust is settling, I suppose, not only on an excellent win at Old Trafford, but also on the transfer window, which is now more or less shut. Even the Saudi window is still open, and the Turkish window, we saw surprising moves there with Victor Osimhen going to Galatasaray on loan, but to all intents and purposes, it seems like business at Liverpool is done. So we're just going to have a look at that, look at where the land lies, really, assess how Slot's got on in his first summer, but also how Richard Hughes has got on in his first summer as sporting director, and of course Michael Edwards back in the FSG setup as well. So just generally to start, I suppose, Matt, how do you sort of reflect on the window that was for Liverpool?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it helps, doesn't it, that Liverpool have won the first 3 games. They were so impressive at Old Trafford. I thought there was loads of real positives to take, and it's always going to be with the caveat of it's still early days. And, you know, we've spoken at length about Ryan Gravenberch, but I think that was another step up for him to do it at Old Trafford on a pitch that big against a team like that, which can sort of get on top of Liverpool teams, even, you know, good Liverpool teams in the last few years, last season being a good example of not performed to their peak. And don't get me wrong, it's not their peak yet. There's still more to come from this Liverpool team, but it was just a big step forward, really. The win at Old Trafford, the fact that they've not conceded a goal in the first 3 games, the fact that it's been cool and composed and calm. There's no sort of stress within those matches. It's not like last season where they go a goal down and have to work miracles every week. So I think that has definitely put everybody in a positive mood. I think there's a lot more that they could have done during the summer window. I think they deserve credit to a certain extent for not doing maybe what some other clubs, Manchester United included, have done, where you don't get one target, so you maybe go for somebody else. And that is an expensive player on big wages who isn't necessarily the perfect option long term. I think there's a balance to it. I think a lot of people will be frustrated. And I think, to be honest, a lot of my assessment of the window will come probably by January, by which time we should probably know a little bit more about some of those contract situations. So I think you've got to give Richard Hughes and Arne Slot a lot of credit in terms of what they've done. Whether it's enough to push for the title this season, I'm not so sure. But as we've said in last week's pod with the predictions, I think I would be very surprised if Liverpool didn't have a good season, build on what they had last season, maybe fall short in terms of challenging City and possibly Arsenal as well. But I'd be surprised if they dropped out of the Champions League places, which, from at least the look of social media and the comment sections on my Facebook page and various other things in the last few weeks, I think that has been a worry for some people. I'm definitely not in that camp. I think it's been positive to a certain extent for Liverpool, but I do think that they possibly could have done a little bit more. But who knows? Maybe not in terms of transfers, but certainly in terms of contracts, that could happen possibly very quickly or possibly in the next couple of months. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, possibly a helpful time for Liverpool to play Manchester United in more ways than one. Of course, as you say, there's that boost of positive energy, if you like, from winning against a big rival at Old Trafford. That reminder that the squad is already in pretty good nick. But also, as you alluded to there, that kind of cautionary tale almost of doing business for the sake of it and sort of moving down your list of alternative targets. I mean, we know that Casemiro had a pretty torrid afternoon in the first half, and, you know, his signing always looked like a compromise from Manchester United. It had been chasing Frankie de Jong all summer, and, you know, randomly pivoted to a very different kind of defensive midfielder. Very strange, and they got a good season out of him. He did well, but then, as was always likely to happen, that sort of ran out, and they were left with a player that Real Madrid had deemed, you know, essentially surplus to requirements, who had already started to decline, who was on massive wages, and that's a bit of an albatross around their neck now. I mean, Liverpool would never have made a signing quite like that, but you look at the Martin Zubimendi sort of saga, if you like, and the decision not to pursue an alternative And you can maybe look at it in a more positive light in the sense that, the decision has been made that in terms of who was available on the market, no one else made sense to actually come in and improve the squad. And, at the time, I was definitely one of them looking at it saying, that seems unlikely. We don't have a specialist number 6 really, apart from Wataru Endo. So surely there's someone other than Martin Zubimendi who could come in and offer an improvement to the squad. But maybe with the change in style under Arne Slot, we need to reassess that in a sense, because maybe as a lone 6, Ryan Gravenberch wouldn't have been the answer. But in this double pivot, as you say, he's passed the biggest test so far by a distance at Old Trafford, playing there with Alexis McAllister. They did look capable of being that partnership for the season, who can, be the foundation for challenging for the top honours. And as you say, assessment will need to wait a bit longer, in the sense that we're only 3 games in. We may find that the squad's been left a little bit light. What happens if one of them gets injured? It's a question of who's the next man up. But yeah, I think, as you say, the combination of what's happened on the pitch and sort of what we did do in the transfer window has left a pretty positive feeling, considering it was such a quiet summer. But before we move on from transfers, I suppose it's worth talking about the business that was done. It's easy to talk about what wasn't done, but Federico Chiesa, of course, has come through the door. We'll see him soon, probably. He's not linked up with Italy. Apparently he was going to come along as a kind of spare man, not likely to actually play any football because of his quiet, disrupted pre-season at Juventus. But he's been left behind at Liverpool because he's on a specialised training regime, hopefully to get him up to speed as quickly as possible. What sort of impact do you see him having for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, I think, to see him being a regular in that starting 11 week in, week out for Liverpool, unless there's a sort of Champions League team and a Premier League team, and maybe it's 3 different players that start on a Wednesday compared to a Saturday, which I think I'm right in saying there's a trip to Crystal Palace in the early kick-off after a Wednesday game. Maybe in those instances, maybe Arne Slot goes with 2 almost completely different 11s. But I think mainly it's going to be more sporadic. I think it might be 20 minutes off the bench here and there for him. It might be slowly being integrated. You're probably looking at a debut for him maybe in the Carabao Cup or something like that, maybe where there's a few more changes and that kind of thing. But I do think it can be a positive signing for Liverpool. I think he's a really good player. I think we know how good his potential can be. I'm not going to play down the injuries. I've seen a few people say, well, he had the one big ACL injury and that was kind of it. I don't think that's necessarily true, to be honest. I think there's at least as many games that he missed through various other muscular injuries and things like that. So it is a concern, but it was absolutely worth the gamble. At the price that Liverpool have paid, the wages that he's on, you might as well just have a go and see what happens. And if it works, then fantastic. You've got yourself a 6th senior forward, which I think we've argued many times on this show across the summer that it would be a good idea for Liverpool to have. We've now seen the reality of the Champions League draw, which again, we've been banging on about all summer, those extra games, the difficulty of those, the fact that probably all 8 games are going to be competitive in terms of Liverpool probably needing to get something out of all of them to make sure that they're in that top 8 to avoid the extra round later on in the competition. So I think he's a player that can make an impact almost more so indirectly than directly. I think the fact that you can maybe take Mohamed Salah off, as we've seen with Trent and Conor Bradley, there's been a bit of rotation late on in games. Maybe we see that with Chiesa and Mohamed Salah. Mohamed Salah might not like that so much. I think he possibly might like the last 20 minutes of certain matches when lesser defences are starting to get a little bit tired and open up. He probably isn't going to like the fact that he's going to be rotated a little bit more often. But I do think it can be a real positive for Liverpool to have that. If you've got a slightly fresher Mohamed Salah or whoever else it might be in that forward line that can be rotated a little bit, that can only be a good thing, really, when there's so many matches to come. So, yeah, it's a real positive. And I think some people possibly are in danger of talking down the moves that Liverpool have done because of the moves that Liverpool haven't done. I think Chiesa and Mamardashvili as well, they're both really astute signings, but that's not to say that they couldn't have done maybe 1 or 2 more of those deals in other positions. I absolutely think that they're a little bit light in midfield and possibly in defence as well, but that's separate really in terms of a conversation to how good Federico Chiesa can be. And I think from what we've seen of him so far as well, he clearly is loving being at Liverpool. I think that's really nice to see. There was, I think his wife on Instagram was putting pictures of them on the pitch at Anfield. You've seen, the videos in training and all of that kind of thing. He's clearly delighted to be at Liverpool. So I'm sure, very quickly he'll get the backing of the fans. And I'm really excited to see what he looks like because, look, I've seen him play very, very well for Italy at European Championships. You've seen little bits of him here and there for Juventus, but I think what we've seen from Arne so far as well is that he gets the best out of these players. He knows how to maybe coax a little bit more out of them. I think possibly we've seen that a little bit with Luis Diaz. Again, small sample size, similar to Ryan Gravenberch. But, if Liverpool can get a really good version of Chiesa, even if it's only for 20 minutes off the bench, I think that will be that could be a big signing for Liverpool this season.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on it a bit there, but what do you make of this kind of opportunism as the theme of the summer transfer window? I mean, it's, as you say, I think both the moves that Liverpool did make were astute. They were opportunistic. You look at both prices and they're lower than you would expect for different reasons. I mean, Chiesa, 2-3 years ago was being talked about as a 70-80 million pound player. So of course there are reasons for the price being what it is, but Liverpool capitalising on that contract situation and on the sort of uncertainty around his injuries, I suppose, to get what is a pretty low risk deal. And then with Mamardashvili, Valencia have had their share of financial difficulties. That probably explains why the price is again lower than what you might expect for a goalkeeper who's been talked up as one of the best up and coming in his position. So, yeah, I mean, both smart pieces of business, but for different reasons. But what do you think about Liverpool sort of focusing on those kind of deals rather than looking at potential problem positions and sort of committing to strengthening there?
Yeah, I mean, I can understand the opportunistic line. I think it was interesting that obviously we never really used to hear from Michael Edwards when he was Liverpool sporting director, and it's interesting to see the contrast now between that and Richard Hughes. I wonder whether we might hear again from him maybe in the next few weeks. Maybe we'll hear more from him if some of those contracts go through or whatever it might be. But I think it's not a bad strategy to have because Liverpool, their squad is so good, as Arne has said so many times, that it is hard to find those upgrades. Now, clearly, there is better defensive midfielders out there than Wataru Endo, for example. Not just better, but better suited to the way that Liverpool play. I think pretty much everyone would be in agreement that that's the case, and they could have found an upgrade. But we've heard a lot from Ian Graham. Obviously, people who've maybe read his book. I spoke to him a few days ago as well, so we'll have some content from him coming on Liverpool.com in the next few days. Their strategy when he was at Liverpool was that they would only sign players who were those kind of game changers, those players that could come into the first 11. There was, one or two examples really, Set and Shaqiri maybe being an obvious one where they kind of went down the route of adding to the squad. But again, that was an opportunistic one. He had the release clause because Stoke got relegated. They managed to do that cheaply, and you obviously saw a short-term impact from him. So I get the strategy. Clearly the strategy has worked in the past. I think the one element of it that I'm not quite so convinced on is that it's fine to be like that and be very selective in terms of those transfers, but you've got to make sure that you're not maybe caught short in one or two positions. So obviously another big theme of the summer has been selling off those young players. I think they've got fantastic prices for those players. I'd be surprised if, we don't look back in a couple of years' time and think that Sepp van den Berg was, a good player for Brentford, but maybe a player that, £25 million is quite a lot for. Fabio Carvalho as well. They've done brilliantly to get the money for those players. But I come back to Bobby Clark. I'm a big fan of him. They got a decent price for him. I think there's a good chance that he might end up back at Liverpool or certainly in the Premier League at some point in the future. It's a great move for him, but I'm not necessarily sure that I would have sold him if Liverpool weren't going to get another midfielder in. Curtis Jones hasn't played a minute yet. He's been injured for a couple of those games and was on the bench for the other one. I just think Liverpool might be a body short in midfield. So it's fine to be opportunistic in terms of if the right midfielder comes up, you go and get them. But then maybe if the right midfielder doesn't come up, maybe you don't sell off Bobby Clark, who maybe could have filled, a hole in the squad. Even if it was just for, another season, if Bobby Clark played 10, 15 games for Liverpool this season, I'm pretty sure Salzburg would have probably come in for him, in a year's time, and the money still would have been there. So I think that was the slight bit of it where I'm maybe slightly in disagreement with Liverpool. Is it's fine to be opportunistic, but then maybe you've got to keep the numbers around as well and make sure you're not slightly short in one or two areas. I think that's the big worry really for me, is that you're only probably one or two midfield injuries away from looking very, very light. And already that is the case this season, and we've not even got to the Champions League yet.
Yeah, I suppose what you would say is with the slot setup, you do have slightly more distinct midfield roles now, in that you have players who can play in the pivot, and then you have players who can play slightly further forward. There are players who cross over both categories. I think Curtis Jones should be one of them. I think Alexis McAllister would be one of them. But from what I saw of Bobby Clark, you'd maybe suggest if he was getting minutes at all, it would be in that more advanced number 8 kind of role. And then you look at the competition there. Szoboszlai's made the spot his own. As I say, Jones can play it. And then Harvey Elliott is another one who can pretty much only play that position in the midfield now, I would say. So, it's tough because you do want that cover, and it wouldn't take much for Liverpool to be sort of in need, or at least wanting that extra cover. But at the same time, if they are going to be sat around for the majority of the season struggling for minutes, then there's a decision to be made, especially when there's decent money, as you mentioned, to be made from cashing in. I think there was a similar sort of decision made on Stefan Bajcetic, really, albeit as a loan rather than a permanent departure. I think from what we've heard inside the club, it's one of them where Liverpool and Slot in particular do really rate him, really like the look of him, but they just had to be realistic and accept that what he needs right now in his career is minutes. He's not going to get them. Like, it wouldn't take too much for him to suddenly be getting called upon. Let's say there was an injury to Gravenberch, then he may even have been the next man up. You don't know. It depends where he falls in the pecking order compared to someone like Wataru Endo. But, in the absence of injuries, he's not going to be in the team. He needs the minutes as a young player. So I think Slot alluded to it in the press conference, didn't he? That these are tough decisions that have to be made when it comes to young players. And yeah, it's very hard to get right. But I think on the whole, the right decisions have probably been made this summer. But I appreciate that there are concerns over leaving things a little bit light. And I suppose the other concern is the sort of long-term element of squad planning. We know that being opportunistic has its benefits, but if you wait too long to address these areas, then you sort of sleepwalk into potential problems, which brings us round to the contracts, which you've been itching to discuss all show, Matt, so we'll get to them now. Obviously, the three of them that are the big ones, the three that expire next summer: Mohamed Salah, Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold. Let's just go through them one by one, and we'll start with Salah, given that he quickly made that the talking point after the Manchester United game, didn't he?
Yeah, I think that the comments were really interesting from him. We don't often hear a great deal from Mohamed Salah, but I think what he was essentially doing is just putting the ball into Liverpool's court. I think from those comments, what I read into those is that he clearly wants to stay at Liverpool. He doesn't want to go anywhere else, but they haven't opened those negotiations. They've not spoken to his representative yet, which I think is slightly surprising. I think there are mitigations for that, as there are with Van Dijk and Trent as well. The fact that Liverpool have changed so much behind the scenes. They've had a new manager. They've obviously had a new sporting director. They've had a transfer window where they've had to be busy behind the scenes, even if some people might sort of laugh at that in terms of the amount of deals that they've done. They've obviously been trying to work on other things as well. And I think now the transfer window is closed. They've put that behind them. There's not really anything else to focus on other than these new deals that are coming up now. And, Mohamed Salah could not be doing much more, really. I think he started this season absolutely in superb form. He's clearly Liverpool's best or most important player, I think, alongside Trent for me at this moment in time. The number of goals, the volume of goals that he gets is not showing any signs of slowing down. You look at his age, he's obviously at a point where there is a question over will he be able to sustain this? But even if he dropped off, he's still at a level where he's still going to be a 20, 25 goal player. I think he's probably going to be, even higher than that this season. He's, a completely different player to what he was. He's, much more creative and much more able to lay on his teammates as well. He's got, a really, really nice partnership, I think, with Dominic Szoboszlai we've seen in the first couple of games of this season. Obviously, Trent supplementing that as well from a little bit further behind them. So in every way, it makes sense, not least the fact that he seems to want to stay at Liverpool. Normally, if a player wants to stay and he's that good, it then makes it a no-brainer. So, yeah, for me, it's an obvious one. Really, the question is how long do you extend that for? Maybe it's a 2 years with an option of a third. Maybe Liverpool think that's a bit too much of a risk and try and negotiate that down. I'm pretty sure Mohamed Salah wants to play at the highest level for as long as he can. All the indications are that he doesn't want to go to Saudi Arabia at this point in time. And I think there's probably sort of two elements of this really as well. One is that I'm not quite sure where else he would go. You wouldn't want to see him playing in the Premier League for somebody else. I'm not sure he'd want that either. Real Madrid have obviously got loads of attacking options. Maybe they would be interested in him on a free transfer. Why not? But other than that, there's not really a great deal of other places for him to go. But for me as well, the other thing is that you wouldn't want to lose him on a free transfer. Even if you gave him a 3-year contract and sold him after 2 years, you could probably pay the wages that you pay him in the meantime just by the transfer fee that you'd be able to get. So for me, it just doesn't make any sense, even if you don't think, and I do think, but even if you don't think that Mohamed Salah is going to be as good as he is now for the next 2 or 3 seasons, you'd still give him a new contract anyway, just to preserve that transfer value. So for me, it makes loads of sense. And I think he is probably just putting it out there, let's have those conversations, let's have those talks. The fact that he said, I came into this game thinking it might be, or it will be, my last at Old Trafford, I think that's just probably clever from his side, really, to put that pressure on Liverpool to do something. I'm not worried about it, or I'm no more worried about it, having seen those comments. If anything, to me, that is just a pointer, really, that Mohamed Salah wants that to happen now and wants Liverpool to get in touch. And I would be very, very surprised if we didn't hear something on all 3 contract fronts between now and January.
Yeah, I think he'd already done most of his talking on the pitch in terms of that new contract and the importance of it. But yeah, it's no coincidence that we're hearing from him in the media, which, as you say, has been a real rarity in his time at Liverpool. So I think we all know what he's doing there, and fair play to him, because frankly, Liverpool should have probably opened talks already. Certainly, with the fact that they have 3 players in this position, it's, as you say, there's reasons for it, but it's left Richard Hughes in an unenviable position. Let's put it that way, because these are the 3 highest earners at the club. There's a good case to be made that they're the 3 key players at the club, and none of them are necessarily straightforward negotiations, given that all of them are in strong positions to demand that they're paid fairly to reflect their status in the team. But also, certainly in the case of Van Dijk and Salah, Liverpool has questions on its side as well about what they can do in terms of the ages and everything. So yeah, it's really not ideal. I don't think that's unfair to say. And I think that the one that's really, I won't say unforgivable, because that's a bit strong. And as you say, there are reasons behind it. But the one that you really scratch your head and think, why has this not been sorted before now, is Trent Alexander-Arnold. Because I think, unlike the other 2, there's just no question in Liverpool's mind that a renewal is what the club wants. He's only just entering his peak years. He should be the future captain of the club. He clearly loves the club. So it's just, why have they got it into this position where, we're 4 months away from foreign clubs being able to get in his ear and negotiate over free transfers, offer massive signing on fees. You'd hope that his head won't be turned, but do you think that it's a bit of a mess that we've ended up here?
It's not quite a mess yet, but I think if we don't hear anything in the next few months, then it obviously becomes that. I think Real Madrid is obviously there in the background and lingers, and I think there is possibly a stronger case for him making that move than maybe people might think. I think the fact that he's won everything at Liverpool, the fact that Real Madrid is what Real Madrid is, I think there's definitely a case for that being the case. There's definitely an argument as well that he could go there and maybe be recognised more for what he is. I think if he stays at Liverpool, clearly Liverpool fans will love him, but there's a whole sort of England conversation to be had. I think it's interesting that their interim manager at least seems to think that he is a right back rather than a midfielder, but there's still, I think, a general undercurrent of conversation in this country of not really appreciating just how good he is and how effective he is. I think if you put him into that Real Madrid side, I think that would probably change. So in terms of that, I think that there is an argument for him making that move. But as you say, he clearly wants to be Liverpool captain, and the way that he celebrated the goal that was ruled out, the way that I saw him go up to the away end at Old Trafford and celebrate in front of the fans at the end of the match as well, the sort of needle that he was filmed as he headed to the team coach afterwards as well. I think, look, it looks to me like a player who very much wants to stay at Liverpool, who wants to be the next Liverpool captain after Virgil van Dijk. There is obviously a Real Madrid conversation to be had, as I say, but I just don't really see a scenario where he would want to leave Liverpool on a free transfer. I don't really see a scenario where Liverpool would even think about that happening. Obviously, if talks haven't happened yet, it's inevitable that they will happen at some point. And as soon as Liverpool do that, you're then looking at probably wages similar to what Mohamed Salah's on at the moment. Whether that's a part of the reason why Liverpool haven't done it yet is maybe to delay that conversation of close to doubling his wages. I think it would be in terms of getting up to the very highest earners at Liverpool. Maybe there's an element of that to it, but yeah, it's a no-brainer, isn't it? I think for all of these players, they should have new contracts, but with the age that Trent is, I think that's the one that is the one that I would say would be unforgivable if they let him go on a free. That just wouldn't make any sense really from anybody's perspective.
Yeah, not only from the sort of fan perspective, but just purely the financial perspective as well. There's just no incentive to let that situation drag on. So now that the transfer window is shut, hopefully, as we say, Hughes will sit down with all three of them and have that conversation. Not all of them will be easy. Maybe none of them will be easy, but you can't know what their demands are even going to be until you sit down and have that conversation. It may be that it's far easier than any of us anticipated, and it can all get wrapped up nice and quickly, which would be lovely. But just before we wrap up, let's have a quick assessment of Arne Slot as well, because we've assessed the transfers, we've assessed the contract situation. I suppose he's the other variable from the summer, and I mean, it's a pretty glowing report card to start off his life at Liverpool, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think he could have done much more. I think in every aspect he's been really, really impressive. I think a big part of what he was going to do when he came into Liverpool in terms of taking over from Jurgen Klopp, obviously the results are one thing, and that has been perfect so far. At some point, Liverpool will concede a goal and Liverpool will lose a game, and obviously then that'll be a different challenge in terms of reacting to that. But I think what we've seen of him in interviews, in press conferences, the way that he's spoken to his players, the way that he's kind of conducted himself, I think has been really authentic, I suppose is the word that I'd use, but he's kind of come across in a really good way. I think the interview that he did with Sky, where he kind of explained his tactics and his way that he kind of dismantled Manchester United at the weekend, that was really impressive, just in terms of the way that he kind of confidently went about that. And then at the end of that conversation kind of went, well, it's just a win. We've come to a team that, I mean, he didn't say this, but it was a team that finished 8th last season and isn't particularly good. There's bigger tests to come. There's bigger challenges. I think he's right to point, obviously, to the Champions League starting, and it will be interesting to see the way in which he manages that squad. I think the big difference that Liverpool need to make this season is that management of the squad, the managing of certain players' loads to make sure that there's not as many injuries as what there were last season. Obviously, we've not seen any of that side of it yet, but purely in terms of what we have seen from him, I think it's pretty hard to find fault with it, really. It's not up to him to go into the transfer market and make those decisions in terms of which players are going to improve Liverpool and which players and positions do they need to strengthen. That's, for other people to take care of. Obviously, he has, a role in that. But I think, generally speaking, I can't really think of too many things he's done wrong so far. Again, it comes with the caveat of it's early days and there's still a lot more for Liverpool to do. But yeah, so far so good. And you'd like to think that can continue. I think what we've seen, particularly with the United game, the way that they won it, the fact that they kept a clean sheet, the fact that it was relatively easy, really, the last half an hour, there wasn't really any kind of scares or threats, but it, at the same time, wasn't one of those where, the the game became more tense, or United players didn't start kicking lumps out of people. It was very much calm, controlled. They kept possession. They didn't do anything silly. They just kind of got out of there, got the win. There was no over-the-top celebrations or anything like that. I think that's a really good sign, and it could really kickstart something. There's always a result, isn't there, when a new manager comes in? You think of the win for Liverpool when Jurgen Klopp came in and they went to Manchester City and won heavily, played some unbelievable football. I think this could be the Arne Slot version of that. So yeah, so far so good, but obviously they've got to continue that now for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the kind fixture list all we want, and I think Manchester United these days are included in that. But the fact is, Liverpool finished last season with, I think, 2 clean sheets in the last 12 in the league. So, and that included a lot of so-called easier games. So I don't think there's any doubt that we've seen a more controlled version of Liverpool, a more secure version of Liverpool, which is a big victory considering the task that Slot has faced in taking over from such a legendary, renowned manager in the club's history. So, yeah, as you say, so far so good. Very, very promising signs, but lots more hopefully still to come. There'll be lots more to come from us as well on the Blood Red channel, so be sure to stay tuned for all of our content there. Check out our written work over on Liverpool.com as well. But in the meantime, that's all from me and Matt, so thanks very much for watching.